welcome to both of you for this wonderful session, very close to my heart, I have to admit. I don't know much. I'm very curious, and I always feel like I'm not doing enough. So I am super excited that you are available to join us and to really bring a bit more insight on how you face your work and under the topic of eco-anxiety. So please introduce yourself, and I'm probably going to jump in with more questions a bit later.
Right. So hi, Dalida. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here with you tonight. So quickly introduce myself. I'm Hortense. I live and work in China, in Beijing. And I'm in charge of sustainable development in a company, and I'm also a facilitator of the Climate Fresk, and I will talk a little bit more about this very soon. So basically, my whole work is around environmental protection and climate change and all of these topics. And so this can create some kind of eco-anxiety sometimes. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. Pauline?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. Hello, Dalida. Thank you for the invitation. So my name is Pauline. I've been living and working in China for 9 years in Shanghai. Now I've been back in France for almost 2 years. I've been working in sustainability for 10 years as well, first as an entrepreneur promoting social enterprises in China, and then more as a trainer facilitator, like to bring climate environmental education in companies, and with Climate Fresk workshops as well. I've actually launched a community in China five years ago. And also a few years ago, I trained as a coach myself, because I was really interested in like supporting people in this transformation process of like all the questioning that the ecological crisis bring. Very meaningful questions about what do we truly aspire to, also dealing with eco-anxiety. And I'm studying a lot eco-psychology, deep ecology, spiritual ecology, all those things that touches to deeper level of transformation when it comes to the ecological transition. And so eco-anxiety and eco-emotions are also a big part of that.
Well,
thank you. And
yeah. So to start with, I would like to present to you like a little case study, so that we have an idea. We can, come into the topic with some concrete facts and ideas and experience that I'm going to share with you, and then we're going to open up the discussion with Dalida, with whoever online who wants to ask us questions and discuss this topic. So I'm going to share my screen. Don't worry, I don't have a full PPT. It's just a few slides to show you what we're talking about. So as I was saying, and so can you see it? I'm trying. Yeah,
we can.
Okay. So I said that I'm a trainer and a facilitator of the Climate Fresk, and Pauline is too. Climate Fresk is an interactive, a collaborative game or workshop to help people understand exactly what climate change is, its causes, its mechanism, its consequences, and based on this knowledge, be inspired to take action. So, and it's a very powerful tool. So what does it look like? It's a 3-hour workshop where people play with cards, put them in a logical order, and by themselves, we are just a facilitator. We're just providing the environment so that people can figure it out on their own and make sense of what climate change is. So it's very powerful because it's not a lecture where I tell you what climate change is or you read a report, but actually people, by moving cards around, by, making their brain work, making their hands work, talking to each other, it creates a very fertile environment for people to make sense of it. And all the content is totally science-based. So just a quick introduction. So people start putting the cards around, And then once it's all set, then we enter a creative phase, because it's very good to use both parts of the brain, the right and the left. And so they go creative around it, for adding colors and arrows and images and text and whatever they want, whatever they feel like, so that all the knowledge they got can actually sink in, and they get a better understanding of it. And because actually what happens is that, well, when people discover what climate change is, and this is, as I said, it's science-based, we start from it, they discover what human activities are doing and how they're impacting and disrupting our the natural balance, and how this is having very serious consequences, up to having consequences on our own lives, on our own livelihood, creating, you know, diseases, wars, whatever. I'm not going to spoil it and give you all the answers, but it can be very stressful. And people will react in very different ways. And this is the interesting part. And this is where I'm coming to. The next bit of the Climate Fresk, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. Yeah. The next bit of the Climate Fresk, first we have the cards and looking at the whole logic, we have the creative part, and then we have the emotion part. And each part is so fundamental, so important in the process, so that it's not just about knowledge, but it's also a transformational workshop. So we use, you might have seen those already, the emotion cards from BMC for mindful communication. We break it into, we have the, you know, if for those of you who know it, we have the feelings cards and the needs cards. Sorry, it's not very clear. So I only take the feeling ones, and I put them all on the table, and I tell people, well, look at those cards and see, you know, right now in your heart, what are the emotions that you're feeling? And so you look at the cards and you pick the ones that you're feeling, because there might not be just one, there might be 2 or 3. And so, and this works brilliantly. And I'm going to show you, you can't see it in my hand right now. So I'm going to share again my screen and show you better what it looks like. And then, so originally, and everywhere in the world, we've been using things like this to actually process emotions, either the emotion, the flower or the tree or the boat. And we tell people, okay, who do you identify to, you know, and because there can be many types of interpretations, and this can work. However, in China, oftentimes we've been feeling that it was very hard. People were like, okay, now let's share our emotions. And people would say, I thought it was very interesting. I learned a lot of things, blah, blah, blah. And we're like, well, that's not emotions. You know, we want one word and one explanation. But we live in a world where many cultures, not just the Chinese, but we're very far from our emotions, and even more here in a way sometimes. Not everybody, of course, I don't want to generalize, but I felt that we were all our facilitators here were very much struggling with that. And so one day I called Dalida and I said, you know, I've got this issue. How can you help me? I mean, do you have any tips? And she told me about her cards. I mean, I knew the cards, and she was like, well, maybe you could try it. And it worked so beautifully that since then, I've only been using this, and facilitators have been using it a lot. So this is what they look like if you haven't seen them yet. And so I put, yeah, so I was saying we put them on the table, and we ask people to pick the ones that they are feeling right now. And this is the trick, is that afterwards, well, we're like, okay, let's share our emotions. Which card did you pick? And this is wonderful, because instead of this is what my emotion, what I am feeling, it's like, oh, the card that I picked. And so it creates a safe distance where people are fully telling their emotions, but because they're this, I picked a card, so they're much more free to talk about it. And the other thing, and then they were like, okay, so I chose, you know what, grateful for discovering all that and learning so much. So immediately after saying the word, they will automatically explain. And every time it's very sharp and very short and sweet. Before it was, people would go blah, 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 blah forever and going around the topic. And this was so sharp. It's just a wonderful tool that I'm very grateful to Dalida. But then, so let me see. Yeah. Yeah. So then the interesting thing is that people come up with very different types of emotions. They are like scared, anxious, desperate, lost, helpless comes a lot, worried, guilty, shocked. These are some of the feelings that we often hear from them. And then others say confident, curious, grateful, peaceful, satisfied. So these are just a few of the examples from the cards, but this shows you that actually people played the same game together, but at the end, they come up with very, very different feelings. And sometimes it's a mix of them, positive and negative, if I may use those terms. So, and this is really fascinating. And so we, this is where we actually, and I'm going to share my last slide. This is where then we kind of explain to them, well, every of these emotions is normal, first of all, and every person is at a different stage. I guess many of you have already heard of the Kubler-Ross model, right? The Kubler-Ross curve, where when you're faced with a very strong a big news or a then you might first be in state of shock, later on denial, then you might be frustrated, go into depression, and then this is once you hit the bottom, this is where you can actually push back and go back up and start experimenting things, and then finally making it really part of your life. And so different people, depending on their experience, on their on their knowledge, on many things, they will be at different stages there. And you can be further away and then go back. Even myself as a Climate Fresk facilitator and trainer, I will also sometimes go from left to right and right to left. This might all happen. So this is where it's very important for us through the process, to reassure people that every emotion is fine, is normal, and that it's so important in this process to understand that different people, to the same news, people will react differently. This allows also to have more like empathy or tolerance, because oftentimes, and I think more and more in this world, we tend to be polarized and say, okay, this is like this is how we should be thinking. And what, you play Climate Fresk and you're still eating meat? How can you do that? And this is, however, when you play that game and you realize that different people did the same thing but have different positions, it's so helpful. It opens up your understanding that, we're all reacting differently. We all have different experience. We all have different emotions. Okay. And so this is, and at that point in the workshop, this is where we can actually start speaking about actions, because we all know that, well, most of us, I guess, in this field know that it's not the rational thinking that is driving our actions, but it's actually emotions that are driving our actions. So, and it's because you have, once we have identified our emotions, it's much more easy to understand why we're acting in such and such a way, and easier to work on it and to get to action. So this is why we find this is such a powerful, although it might be just 10 minutes in the workshop, but it's something that we'll never cut, because it actually helps go next to look at the actions. Now, people can be very anxious that their actions won't have much of an impact when they see the huge issue of climate change in general. And so we discuss about actions, not at an individual level, it's important, but also at a collective level. We might also look, okay, what can you do in your company or in your community? What can your company do? You know, not necessarily you, but your team or your company, or what could the government be doing? So brainstorm and start to imagine what the future could be, what things could be done. And personally, I try to convey three main messages. Because when people look at these actions, is that number one, each individual action counts, because it's actually the sum of all of these individual actions that will help us reach that tipping point, where if everybody is stepping there, then at some point it will tip off on the other side, and this will drive change. And we don't need to reach 50%. This is the magic of the tipping point. Different studies say it might be between 15 and 30%. That's one thing. The second thing is that we often say that the most impactful thing that you can do is actually through education. And I believe coaching is the same. It's because one person through education, or for example, through a Fresk, well, I'll do this with 7 people, and then through these 7 people, one of them will become a facilitator, and it will be, a big snowball. And the third thing that I like to say is that the best solution to eco-anxiety is not to work on individual actions, but actually to work as a community. Collectively, it actually helps. You might, if you're doing things alone, you might fall into like helplessness. But if you do things in a community, it gives you so much strength. So you might, get involved in your local NGO, or, team up with friends and see how you can reduce waste and support each other. Or, okay, we like to travel, but okay, maybe we cannot travel that far with planes. What could be super great trip that we could do together just by train or nearby? And if we're, being this community that support each other. So I don't want to say too much more. I already spoke for 15 minutes because I think that this is I wanted to set the scene and give a precise example of how emotions are being used and how the BMC tools are also being used, and so helpful. Really, it was a game changer. So thank you. And yeah, I just want to, from this, to kick off our discussion around eco-anxiety in a more general way. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Hortense. And if I can jump in, I think it's super interesting to start with this example because of like how we talk about emotions during Climate Fresk, because as a matter of fact, when the workshop was created in 2018, like this emotion part was really, really quick. Like I think the founder, he put it here by intuition, but he didn't really know why it was important himself. And it's really like by practicing and like having more and more people like doing this workshop that they realized how critical this part was. And at the beginning, a lot of facilitators tended to skip it because they didn't really understood the purpose or like even how to handle it. And it's still an issue, like how to handle this discussion of like emotion. So that's why I think it's such a good example. But it's one of the big topics like in the community right now, like how to really translate to new facilitator the power and the fundamental aspect of this emotion part, and how to make people like also more comfortable talking about it, because it's very normal that it's becoming such a big topic for Climate Fresk when we know that eco-anxiety is becoming like such also a global issue. And so maybe we can just bring first a definition of eco-anxiety, like because we've been mentioning it a few times, but like trying to define what it is. I will read the definition of the American Psychology Association. So they describe it as the chronic fear of environmental cataclysm that comes from observing the seemingly irrevocable impact of climate change and the associated concern for one's future and that of next generations. So I think it's a long way to say that it's kind of a chronic fear of the future due to the ecological crisis and especially the climate crisis. And also, as Hortense mentioned at the beginning, the understanding of the responsibility of human beings. And there are many definitions of eco-anxiety out there, but I think a few important things to understand, like really what are we talking about is that first, it's a kind of suffering that can touch to very existential questions, like to questions that are really related to our own identity. And so it can be very painful, very hard to face, but it can also trigger actions and a sense of responsibility. So again, we're going to say that I think many times, but as Hortense already mentioned, like those emotions, this anxiety, they are signals. They're here to give us some information. They're not bad in itself. It's just a symptom. And another thing about eco-anxiety is that it's really about projection of the future, because you don't need to have lived through climate disasters or thing. And I think now more and more people, we've all go through like heat waves or things like this. But even though you didn't, you can have this eco-anxiety just by going through the facts, as we do in Climate Fresk, and like being able to project in those catastrophes, those consequences that are very likely to happen. So we also talk about anticipated grief of a future that we thought we were going to have, and that as we go through all those information, we understand that the future that we thought we were going to have is not that certain. And so this uncertainty is very hard to deal with. And then it becomes way easier to project into dystopian scenarios, because this is something we can imagine, then projecting into the uncertainty that we basically have no control or no information about. So some people talk about pre-traumatic stress as well. And again, as Hortense mentioned, like we talk about eco-anxiety, but it's really about a panel of emotions that goes from sadness, fear, guilt, powerlessness, grief, everything that can go through us as we go through this information. And it's also interesting to mention that there was one big global study in 2021 that that interviewed like young people all over the world in all different countries. And it was interesting to see that there is no country where young people are not going through eco-anxiety, and that globally, more than half people aged between 16 and 25 years old feel either sad, anxious, powerless, or have other type of negative emotions about the environment. So altogether, it's like hundreds of millions of people that might be experiencing those type of negative psychological response. And obviously, women, young people, minorities are more likely to be eco-anxious for different reasons, more vulnerable, having a nature of caring a bit more, and for young people, obviously, like having their future ahead of them. And so I think the first point, once we said that, it's that I believe personally that it's very urgent for more psychologists, coaches, everyone that can be like in front of people that are going through those emotions, to be educated and to be able to support people that are suffering from eco-anxiety. And that today it's really far from being the case. And I think it's a really bad vicious cycle when we know that people are going through all those emotions that are already something that tend to isolate yourself from the people around you, because very likely your husband or wife or your parents or the people you work with don't share those concerns. So it's already very hard. But if then when you arrive in the therapy room, you are in front of someone that just don't take it seriously or is not able to understand what you're going through, I think it can be very detrimental, obviously. But it's a very tricky question as well, because it's a very different thing that other type of mental health issues. Actually, experts say that eco-anxiety is not a mental health issue, because it's not something to be fixed in itself. Like, it's something that we need to learn to navigate with. But what needs to be fixed is like at the collective level. It's not in ourselves that there is something wrong. They say that eco-anxiety is a very sane and rational response to the climate crisis. So, and even some people don't like this term of eco-anxious, for this reason, because it puts like some of a negative label on people, when actually it's like people that are just, we could say, more eco-conscious, eco-aware. We even talk about eco-anxious people as being like blowers, because they're sending warnings in the name of the earth, of the living world. So I think it's it puts also like all those profession in a kind of a critical space, because you need to be able to understand it. You need to live it. You need to live it, and then you need to also be like have digested it, because once you are in the middle of it, when you go through it, it's very hard to not be triggered or to have enough distance. So yeah, it's more a question mark also for me on this question, but I think it's very interesting for coaches, community, and everything to be asking themselves this question.
So Pauline, you're saying that so being eco-anxious, it can either be like totally depressed, or it can also be people who are, you know, believing it and doing stuff. It can be either like it can be active people in doing climate action, but it can also be people who are depressed and who or in denial. I mean, is that right? Are there all of these different facets of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of also building upon what you were saying, that people can have very different reactions to what they learn about the climate, and there are also different ways to be eco-anxious. There are people that are going to be eco-anxious in like a very engaged way. They are doing a lot. Maybe it's people that are already working in this field, like scientists, activists, people that are facing those news, whether they want it or not, a lot, and they're going to be like, it's going to be a huge burden. They're going to be like really psychologically exhausted to have to face those things, very depressed, like feeling that what they're doing is not enough and everything. So we talk about also the ecological burnout of those people. Like you have more and more people like burning out of just like feeling powerless and like having a sense that they're just acting in the wind. And you have people that are going to be more on the hyper traumatized lens. So people that have this kind of ecological awareness, like they are awaking to all this. And so now the only thing they can do is think about it. They need to consume more and more tons of information to feed themselves, like to better understand, double check. They want to know everything. They're going to watch hours of conferences, videos, and they're going to start questioning everything, like the way where they live, like their relationships, their work. So it's people that they want to minimize the risk to the maximum, because they want to gain this sense of safety again. So these are the people that are going to be the most likely to be entering into like a job transition, maybe going to the countryside because they think it's going to be like more environmentally friendly. All those type of big decision that when they're driven by the fear and can be also sometimes a bit complicated. These are going to be people that are going to tend also to be more isolating themselves from their friends or people that cannot understand, because they don't understand that people cannot feel the same way. And finally, there is the third type, that is people that are a bit more at peace with all that. They have been through kind of those one or the other phase, and they have been through this thing, like this, going through a work of emotional digestion, and so now they're able to keep a bit more distance. I think, as you said, Hortense, it's also always like on the edge, like you're never in a safe place. You can have things that trigger you, but you learned to live with it. I think this is a kind of where we want to go, and this is also why we need to be able to work with people that are able to help us get there. Yes, I see you have your hand raised, Dalida.
Yeah, if it's okay, can I ask a question?
Sure.
I am curious. So Pauline, you mentioned that you actually started the talk maybe 5 years ago while you were in China, and now you're in Europe. And I am really curious first, what have you both noticed over the years? I mean, I've heard from the presentation that maybe first the emotions are addressed in a different way, but in terms of the interest to hear the topic, and also yeah, we heard from Hortense a little bit about China and what is the response. I'm really curious, what is your experience of what is happening in Europe or in France specifically, and some responses
Do you
there.
mean do you mean the response to the topic of emotions or to climate in general?
Maybe climate in general. What have you noticed that has shifted in these past 5 years? And change from China and France?
Yeah. Well, for China, you will complete Hortense, but I mean, I think on my side, what I've noticed is like a big difference between China and Europe is like the perception of the responsibility. I think in China, like for a lot of people, it's not really their responsibility. It's a governmental issue. It's a global issue. So it's hard for them to relate. And there is also a very strong belief in technology, that technology we're gonna find technological solutions that are gonna help. What I'm wondering, and I don't know, Hortense, how much of an answer you have to that, but I know that those type of reactions, like usually like putting the responsibility on someone else or believing in like magical solutions, is also a response to some type of emotions that might be too hard to deal with. So I don't know how much also it's because it's harder for people to be in touch with their emotion and everything. It's just easier to, how much is cultural, how much is like a psychological response as well, I don't know. But this is really like striking in China for me. And in Europe, I feel like a lot of polarization around the topic. I think now it's really on everyone's lips. It's in 5 years, it went from being a topic that some people, you could still say that you're not interested to talk about it, or that's not your problem. Now you cannot really say that anymore. Like all companies are doing things. It's really everywhere. But it's polarizing people like a lot. I mean, I think like everything we see it in the media, like, but the ecological crisis is really like a catalyzer for me for this polarization. And so we see more and more people arriving in workshops with like climato-scepticism arguments that they're ready to give you. But again, I think this is also where the being aware of the impact of eco-anxiety and how sometimes denial, skepticism, looking for magical solution is just a survival mechanism as well, because for some people it's just too hard to face. It's also helping as a facilitator to welcome it and to not get triggered by those kind of things. So.
Yeah, you made very good points. I will only add a few things. Indeed, when we do Climate Fresk, we do a lot that are public events. And so public events, obviously people come because they want to, they're interested in it. We also do a lot of Climate Fresk in companies, and they're obliged to do it. And so it's very different crowds. And indeed, I was once facilitating a workshop where one of the participants came in and said, I don't believe in it, from the beginning. And so we invite them to, anyway, they have to. So we invite them to just play the game, just follow it. And then, well, we explain that it's scientific, everything, all the content come from the IPCC reports. So, take it or leave it, but it's like 99.5% of scientists in the world are today agree that that climate change exists and that it's 100% due to human activity. So, I'm not saying it. It's the IPCC, it's the UN, it's all of these scientists. It's a it's a global scientific consensus, right? So this is one thing that we bring, and then we say, okay, just follow it. And then, so eventually, through everything that they're going to go through, eventually some of their, they'll start questioning themselves. But then we could tell them, well, afterward, there's a time for discussion. And this is and this person was great in the discussion afterwards, because maybe she, and it was not about arguing that, no, it doesn't exist. It was, actually it was constructive. So welcoming, explaining, and, welcoming people as they are is, and understanding, as you said, as a facilitator, understanding that every person might be in a very different place actually helps a lot. Here, I haven't seen evolution in the last 5 years. It's more, what is the background of people? Obviously, young, educated people can be super smart, super knowledgeable about the topic, and bring in very interesting points. And then interestingly, actually, most of the people that we see that subscribe by themselves, it's not necessarily the young. I see a lot of middle-aged people, especially middle-aged women. And I see this a lot. For kids, so half of the time it's like, well, their parents brought them in and they have to. And so we have a kids version, which makes it easier for them. But yeah, it's really depends so much on the people. I wouldn't like to generalize, but I think what Pauline said was a good one.
It's interesting what you say, because it's the same in France. Middle-aged women, public workshops. Yeah.
Julia.
Yeah.
Hello. Hi, Hortense. Hi, Pauline. Thanks for your wonderful presentation. So I have a question regarding youth, in particular older teenagers / young adults, because I work with this population across different international school system, French school system, the school now where it's the IB curriculum. So different school system, different background, and yet I see the same concerns. And the school where I work now is actually all mission oriented towards a sustainable future. So education as a sustainable future. We talk a lot about ecology and climate change, and it feels so heavy at times for them. It feels like we're just throwing at them all the problems and hoping that they will solve those problems. So I'm wondering what suggestion you would have to work around this, particularly eco-anxiety, particularly for young people. And yeah.
I don't know if that will fully or even partially answer your question, but when first they should do Climate Fresk. It helps because it's a playful way to get into the science and to understand what it is exactly. So that helps a lot. That's one thing. Then we also use games. Especially for kids, but we also for teenagers, and some facilitators even use these games for adults sometimes. But using games it's about dynamics. It's about keeping people involved and interested, but it also helps. I don't know. It's I guess it triggers different parts of the brain so that people can look at things in a different way, and not, it's not just serious and boring or creating anxiety, but sometimes, using these games can be something. I don't know, Pauline, if you have other...
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I feel what I'm going to say, it's not true only for young people, but I think it's even more relevant to them. I think it's when we're going through all those feelings and those emotions, we're not going to make them disappear. Like, the reality is what it is. So it's more about how do you build resilience for yourself, and especially as young people, like how do you, and for me, like emotional awareness, like being in touch with their emotion is like such an important step of this resilience, because we're so used, as we said, like to stigmatize some emotions, like feeling that difficult emotions are bad and we don't want to feel them, that when we're getting exposed to those things that are difficult, then we might get lost into those emotions, and then it's too hard to process them, and we're gonna get stuck there. Like there are so many beliefs like that those emotions are bad, but just teaching kids like the role of emotions, and like that those emotions are here to give them information. Actually, it's like supposed to be a feedback loop, right? Like we're supposed to receive emotions like, oh, we're not feeling comfortable, what's going on is not right. So I'm going to take some action to actually try to make myself feel better. And those actions should be about like, okay, like how to make the world a better place. But because we are hindering this feedback loop, we just put those bad emotions on the side or under the carpet, then we're hindering this like natural feedback loop. And so we just get paralyzed and immobilized, and we don't know what to do. And it just also suck out all our vital energy. So learning actually how to be with those emotions, I think it's such a big step already. And understanding that those emotions, they can go through us, but we don't need to, it's like, it's also a sign of our compassion, right? It's because we are compassionate being, we're able to suffer with the earth, and we are connected to all that we're actually able to feel those feelings. So yeah, I think it's like all this reconnection process with our emotions, with our body, with nature also is building a kind of resilience that can really help us to face it. And I will really recommend you to look at the work of Joanna Macy for the ones that don't know. It's called The Work That Reconnects. And she's been working for 40 years like to create this like work in 4 stages. And one step is about honoring our pain for the world. It's the second phase before we can actually go back the curve. It's a really beautiful work that can be done with anyone, with young people as well. And that really helps to understand like the role of emotions, and then also our interconnection with everything, and then re-energize ourselves into action in a way that where we don't feel alone anymore. We need to look at it to understand. Maybe what I'm saying is like a bit blurry, but yeah, I will really recommend to look at it. And yeah, just I think not focusing only on the facts, but focusing on our ability to deal or on inner work, and also looking at other ways to talk, like creating desirable future. It's something that is completely underlooked, but it's very easy to look at the problem, but what actually do we want? What world do we want to live in? How we create hope and desire for young people about what the world could be, and creating like some kind of purpose and meaning that, okay, actually, if I take action, if I work, it could be working towards something and not just against something, but towards something that's, yeah, that I desire actually for myself and for next generation. It's also very important.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was about to talk about that, these new narratives, because oftentimes when you think about, okay, what can I do? Well, I'm going to eat less of this and travel less and less and less. And I'm like, well, that's not desirable. That's not fun. That's not, that's not the life I grew up hoping for, and so the idea is, by creating this new narrative, is imagining what life could be. Imagine a carbon neutral world. What would it look like? And this power of imagination, creating this desirable world. And actually, there is another fresk that exists just about that, but this can be very powerful to and something that we use a lot also is at the beginning of a fresk, we icebreaker, and we say, okay, everybody say one thing. What makes you happy? And one will say, well, being healthy, being with my family, spending time with friends. Okay, great. And so we, as a facilitator, I remember this, what they said. And at the very end, or they write it on a Post-it and I say, keep it in your pocket. And at the very end, I tell them, well, take it out of your pocket and now read again what you said. What makes you happy? Because they had been brainstorming about all the action that they can do to reduce carbon. And now they look in their pocket and they're like, well, actually, what makes me happy does not produce any carbon. So maybe my life, I would be better if I rebalanced it and instead of traveling and buying stuff and eating, you know, maybe actually spending more time with my friends or with my kids or whatever. Maybe this will I'll have a better life that way. And so, yes, a low carbon life is super desirable because actually, so this is one example.
Thank you.
Maybe I can ask, if nobody else has a question. This is such a powerful moment. I can hear how, and often in coaching and group coaching, we question what is the difference between coach and facilitator. But I'm really hearing that there is a lot of overlap and how potent these topics are for coaching. And maybe Pauline, since you are a coach, maybe a bit of a coach specific question here. Do you see people one-on-one, and how would you suggest that coaches go about when presenting themselves as eco awareness coach, or how would that really be? Maybe some story about your clients that you work with.
Actually, that's a very good question. I'm still trying to figure it out. Because I trained as a coach really specifically to coach people on this topic, but it hasn't been that easy. And I haven't found the right title yet, or the right way to to frame it. I've been working a lot with entrepreneurs that are working in this field. So I actually, like, at the end, those topics comes up, but it's also like as impact entrepreneurs that I get to work with them. So I don't know if you know, but there is like there are things that start to appear in the coaching world that are very specifically on climate change. There is a climate change coaches training based in the UK. That I've done. It's kind of a short course, like it's really a complementary thing that you can do at some point too. And it's very interesting, like, because they take really all the basis fundamental of coaching, but applying to discussion around climate change. It's really helpful to see how to bring those topics. And there is also, not as a training, but there is the Climate Change Alliance, Climate Coaches Alliance, which is the CCA, which is an alliance. It's free. You can become a member as long as you're a coach or interested in coaching. And there are a lot of events around climate change coaching as well. They also wrote a book, Climate Change Coaches also. So you have 2 books out there around climate change coaches. And it's, yeah, I think it's quite interesting, but all coaches in those space are all, working on this and like asking them the question about how to bring it to clients. It's still a very, very niche. Clients, I don't think, like, for now, clients are going to a coach specifically for that. So you don't have a lot of coaches that really frame it just as climate change coaching. It's just something that they add as a specialty or expertise. But yeah,
So what I'm hearing, maybe there is more about, at the moment, there is more demand to actually support those who are at the forefront of climate change, activists and entrepreneurs as well. So you can be a business coach, but at least you really know their topics in a way.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's because I was in the space of like impact entrepreneurs that it was easier for me to be in touch with those people. But I feel like, yeah, because climate entrepreneurs, like, they are still entrepreneurs, so they get it also what a coach is and why it's important. Whether like activists, for example, it's a lot harder. I think a lot of coaches do pro bono with activists, but you also have a lot of misunderstanding around the coaching world and self-development world in the activism world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not always easy to bring coaching in and to make them see the value of it. So I think it's still a work to be done. But yes, as you said, a lot of coaches, they also are business coaches or things like this. But when they contract with the client, they bring in that this is something that they care about. You have a lot of different approach, but some coaches are going to be like, I'm bringing in that it's something important to me, and that I'm going to, if it's okay for the client, like to contract that this is something that they're going to bring in and challenge maybe the client about also in their discussions around business or life or things like this. So it's yeah.
Yeah, very similar topic, just like when we work with mindfulness as well. We in many ways there is an overlap, because we also, even if we present ourselves as mindfulness coaches, our clients don't necessarily need to be interested in mindfulness or have mindfulness practice, but we would kind of like contract in a way and say, this could be the part of the process, but other than that, you know, any moment of silence could be called a mindful moment, right? And I think this is also a conversation that we could even brainstorm a little bit more, as BMC Academy is coming up with more and more coaches as well who are graduating. We are a very new school, so we just have a small number of people who are being certified, and a little bit more now who are in the process of certification. But one of the maybe also future of coaching is being involved in the pro bono work and being becoming familiar with all these different groups that are having different topics. So I would really love to continue to talk with both of you how we can support. Not to put too much pressure, but you know, in any case, maybe a little bit more education. Do you deliver Climate Fresk online? is that
Absolutely
enough? You do. All right. Okay.
There are facilitators all over the world. We have a very large network. It has been translated in 47 languages, I think. So it's there is a high chance that anywhere you are in the world, there might be some facilitators not too far. But yes, it happens online, absolutely. And it works pretty well. We have a great tool online to do it.
All right. Yeah, wonderful. So I know what will be our next topic. We will be talking then. I'm very excited about that. I'm just wondering if anyone else has any questions.
Well, maybe it's not a question, but just a reflection. Back to working with young people, and so I really liked your answers about my first question, and this idea that as adults, as educators, we want to have our students, our youth, being sensitized to the topic, but we don't have solutions. We're not experts, right? So so first of all, of course, I hear how the Climate Fresk and games can be a way simply to bring that sensitization with the game, the playful aspects. But I'm also hearing or thinking on how coaching is also a good way, because as a coach, you don't need to be the expert, so you don't need to have the solution. And then through that partnering, that's where we can also support. So I found that really interesting, because yeah, on those topics, nobody has the solution. So we cannot come as an expert. We are expert of the process, either the Climate Fresk process or the coaching process. But the solution needs to emerge from those partnering conversations.
Absolutely. Actually, at the end of Climate Fresk, when we discuss actions, I mean, as a facilitator, I mean, we're not coming up with solutions. Actually, the Climate Fresk itself, from its creation, said, well, we provide all the information, you know, the science and everything during the game, but then afterwards, we're not here to propose any action, because actions can be very different. I mean, they can be political. We don't want to go into that. It depends on what country you are, the education you have, the means you have. It's very different. So this is where we're really only a facilitator, and we get people to discuss. We use some frameworks to facilitate the discussion, you know, by topics or with an axis or whatever. But it's up to them. It's a more of a brainstorming session between them that we facilitate. And then, you know, they can leave with, and we ask them at the end, okay, now maybe you have one commitment that you want to know what will be the action that you will choose from all of that and that you're going to take back home and implement from now on. But there are other tools, other games, other workshops that focus much more on the actions and are very well designed too. Yeah, but right, there are all kinds of tools out there.
And I think that coaching is a really good opportunity to be working with young people and to like start working on identifying their purpose, like what really brings meaning to them. I think it's so powerful at a young age to have this chance to be reflecting on that. And like, if you can identify things that really gives you meaning and purpose and those kind of things, it's so much easier afterwards to take action in a way that is not like, you know, to ease the fear or whatever, but to actually makes you feel good. Joanna Macy talks about active hope. It's like not a passive kind of hope. It's like a hope that you identify and you have the strength to contribute to it, to make it more likely to happen. And it's basically, I think, a good image of where we want to be. It's like just working toward our hopes. And not more. Like, we are not gonna fix the world by ourselves. We're not gonna make it disappear, but we can find meaning in like working towards that. And I think also learning to take care of ourselves. We're not gonna save the world as armies of burned out people. So connection again with ourselves, with nature is like so important to be able to face whatever is happening.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Conclusion, Pauline.
Pardon, Hortense?
It's a beautiful conclusion.
Yes, yes, exactly. What a way to wrap up this beautiful hour that moved from this a little bit daunting title, eco-anxiety, into active hope. And I guess this is what we really want to bring to every session with every client. And it's just knowing where the youth is. Maybe I'm just wondering, this is maybe what I'm taking away. It's like taking this active hope that we can just bring the sense of not being helpless and hopeless, because when youth sees us being like that, I mean, how can they be inspired, right? So I'm just wondering if anybody else would like to chip in, or if everyone could take a word or something you're taking away from this session. Well, what would that be? Maybe from Laura, Julia, Celine.
I take the words, the quote or the words that Pauline shared about Joanna Macy, active hope. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dalida, for this offering this platform. It's been a pleasure to spend this evening with you guys.
Wonderful.
And thank you so much, Pauline, for coming in. Such a great contribution.
I think Laura would like to share as well. Laura.
Thanks a lot for session. It was very, very insightful, very connecting also with myself, of course. Yeah, I would say connection with the nature. That's the word I take with me in a mindful way. It means in the present with the nature, with our body, not just with our mind. Because exactly as both of the speaker was emphasized, the mind can trap us in some narrative and then get into big stories. So I would say just going to the nature, let's go outside.
Connect with nature.
Yeah, wonderful. Celine?
Yeah, I got so much inspired as well because it reminds me of my job before was legal. So every time bring the bad news and they don't want to acknowledge it. And it's just some simple, like a personal situation, but when it comes to society, it become much bigger and it's easier for us to deny it. But if we find a way to be mindful with it and allow it comes to face it, to be aware of it, step by step, I think it's just at some point we are able to live with it and start to face it directly. I think it's very beautiful. And that's the moment until we start to change things.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you
for sharing.
both so much, and thank you everyone for showing up as well and being part of such important conversation. Let's keep sharing and talking. I'm really inspired that International Coaching Week gave us this chance. So it's never too late to begin.
Thank you so
so
much.
much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.